Hopping into Genesis 5. Here we go. From Adam to Noah. Okay, this is the history of the descendants of Adam. When God created people, he made them in the likeness of God. We created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them human. All right. Yeah, it's really, really good here. What we got? Adam was 130 years old. When Adam was 130 years old, his son Seth was born. So again, this makes me question the age of Cain a lot. But it also makes me really wonder about the timeline, I guess, because I think what's confusing in this is we're used to like a sequential timeline, and this kind of says here's a big chunk, and then it kind of goes back and fills in a little bit of detail so far. So I wonder, the reason I'm saying this is because it makes me wonder. I was reading in Genesis 4, Adam slept with his wife again. She gave birth to another son at verse 25. She named him Seth, for she said, God has granted me another son in the place of Abel, the one Cain killed. I was saying at this point she's lost two sons because Cain has been banished. But that's me assuming that immediately after the murder of Abel that he gets banished. And it could have been that there was more time that had passed, and like we don't know. If like Seth wasn't born until Adam was 130 years old, it doesn't give me this idea of like teenage Cain and Abel or anything like that. It makes it, well, this could be any number of things. Yeah, so just, I don't know why that was important. I guess just to say whether or not there were other people, or this is just the beginning of a lineage, and then Cain's wife went with him from the family. That's, I don't know, it seems like a lot of speculation and weird things, but I'm trying to be as open and present in this right now as I can. So here we go. Adam was 130 years old when his son Seth was born. Seth was the very image of his father. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 930. So, much longer lifespan back then. When Seth was 105 years old, his son Enosh was born. Okay, and it told us that when Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. It was during his lifetime that people began to worship the Lord. Yeah, man, that's pretty crazy. Okay, after the birth of Enosh, Seth lived another 807 years. He had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 912. 912. When Enosh was 90 years old, his son Kenan was born. After the birth of Kenan, Enosh lived another 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 905. So we're seeing life expectancy is much higher. They're living an average of like 900 years at this point, and that they're having many sons and daughters. They're living into this idea of multiplying and filling the earth. So we see that, and when I count that with the end of Genesis 4, it was during Enosh's lifetime, or Seth's lifetime. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. It was during his lifetime, so you can read that as Seth or Enosh, but I read it as Enosh, that people first began to worship the Lord. So you see them sticking with God's commandment. You see even with Cain's tribe, that kind of come, his offspring and stuff, that they recognize the mark of Cain, and that murder is a sin, and that vengeance is mine, says Lamech. The point is like you still see that people are worshiping God, that they know good and evil at this point is what this is pointing out to me. When Kenan was 70 years old, his son Mahalalel was born. After the birth of Mahalalel, Kenan lived another 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 910. Okay, when Mahalalel was 65 years old, his son Jared was born. After the birth of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 895. So again, you see this long pattern of multiplication, having sons and daughters. They die after, an average of 900 years. When Jared was 162 years old, his son Enoch was born. After the birth of Enoch, Jared lived another 800 years. He had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 962. When Enoch was 65 years old, his son Methuselah was born. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived another 300 years in close fellowship with God, and he had other sons and daughters. That's an interesting aside that nobody else had. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived another 300 years in close fellowship with God. Nobody else has that note. He had other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years in all. He enjoyed a close relationship with God throughout his life. Then suddenly he disappeared because God took him. What? So that's a big deal. Saying he's enjoyed this close fellowship with God, he's had a close relationship with God his whole life, then suddenly he disappears because God takes him. He lived 365 years. That is much shorter time than all of these other people, all of these other descendants of Adam. 900 years. So this one lives in close relationship and fellowship with God throughout his whole life, and suddenly God takes him. Interesting. Why? That makes me wonder why. Why did he take him? Was he just no good because he was in such close fellowship with God that he wasn't in fellowship with anyone else? Why? It makes me wonder why he was taken. And there's nothing else right here about Enoch. So that's a really interesting question that pops up. He lives a much shorter life than these others. He does have many sons and daughters, but he lived in this close fellowship with God. Close relationship with God throughout most of his life. Then suddenly he disappeared because God took him. So it shows that God is able to just take people, just like we've seen God is able to do pretty much anything, including forming life from the dirt, speaking things into creation, but he's always doing things with a purpose. And most everything that you've seen God do so far has either directly stated a purpose to or because of, or this is a consequence of, but everything has been guided still under this relational Lord servant father-children kind of relationship. I'm reading into the father-children. That's not really shown. I can't, that's not fair for me to do. As a creator and as a Lord. I don't know. This is interesting because this is one where you're like, well, I don't know the motivation for that. I don't know the motivation for that. When I see all of the punishment, I still see as God is bringing this punishment and consequences of sin and this banishing, that he's still providing and that he's still caring for, that he's still with them, that there's this worship that's going on, that his word is known, his goodness is known. And yet, there's this one person who's in a close relationship with God throughout his life, and then suddenly he disappeared because God took him. It does not give a very clear, well, why? And I guess I could zoom out of creation and say, well, why to all of that, really, but that just doesn't, this is one that really, like everything else in creation, has a purpose and a place, and you see light separating from darkness. So I don't know. Maybe this is another pattern in that, if I want to read into that. Maybe this close fellowship and relationship with God made him such light that the darkness of the world, he had to be separated from that. But again, that's speculation. I don't know. It just pops into my head. What do you think? That's weird. This is a weird little aside. We'll come across a lot more of those, so I won't spend much more time on that. When Methuselah, at verse 25, was 187 years old, his son Lamech was born. This is a different Lamech. After the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters, and he died at the age of 969. When Lamech was 182 years old, his son Noah was born. Lamech was 182 years old, and his son Noah was born. Lamech named his son Noah, for he said, He will bring us relief from the painful labor of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed. Names had much more importance and significance here. You see Eve being named because she'll be the mother of all children. She'll be the mother of all mankind. And then you see, like, he's named this. Our children are named this because the Lord has blessed me with. The Lord has made this possible. You see names being very, very important. But this is an interesting one where this proclamation in this name is very strong. How bold of a naming. He named his son Noah, for he said, he will bring us relief from the painful labor of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed. Yeah, the Lord cursed it as a consequence to sin and to a lack of obedience and right living. And man, that's a bold thing to say. He's going to deliver us. He's going to bring us relief from the painful labor. He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. That's interesting. After the birth of Noah, Lamech lived 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He died at the age of 777. By the time Noah was 500 years old, he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah, who is named because he will bring relief. He will bring comfort from this painful labor and toil of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed. He will bring relief and comfort from this curse and this consequence of sin. Man, yeah, let's see what happens next. But a lot of interesting things. It's tempting to read chapters like this, and I know that there are some that are coming, even though I'm pretending that I haven't read this, and I'm trying to just, be present in the moment and take it at face value. There's a lot of lineage. There's a lot of descendancy that's going to be kind of listed, and that's very important culturally to the readers of the Bible, which is why the authors kind of put that, but it's also to trace that lineage back for prophetic purposes, for purposes of God's promise provision, and for that being proved to anyone that would doubt. And I think it's important for us to kind of know that going in, because otherwise you're just like, yeah, I just kind of want to skip through this. Begat. It's going to get really monotonous in certain areas, but it's important to know that I believe that if this is the Word of God, and everything that He says is true and right, and that this is His word, which is good for teaching and correction and for reproof and training in righteousness, that there are not wasted words and no syllable is empty or void, as the song would say. So I don't want to skip over those things. But I think it's really interesting to notice kind of patterns that are forming in that, and what, as you zoom out and think about everything that's come before, everything that God has said and decreed and declared and given purpose to, or named purpose to, or blessed or cursed, it's important to look at the patterns of people in that, people who are made in God's image, because that's what this is recording. Basically, not just what God has done and what He has revealed, but also what our response to His revelation and to His word and to His works has been, and that helps us kind of frame and get a new perspective of how we might respond to His word and His works today in our walk. And I'm excited to see what comes next, and I hope that you are too.